So today I want to talk to you about being an expert and being a marketer and when to wear which one of those hats. So I'm going to start by saying this is a problem that every single entrepreneur suffers from. They wear their expert hat 24/7. They can't help themselves. They cannot divorce themselves for oversharing, spewing their knowledge, sharing their technical expertise, often to a fault sometimes, right? Hands up and let me know in the comments if you have ever just spewed out a bunch of free advice that you probably could have gotten paid for. I know I have. And so one of the things that I see as a very common mistake online entrepreneurs make is that they constantly have their expert hat on. And it often results in them giving away free advice. It results in them like literally repelling their clients, their ideal clients, because their ideal client is like, I don't know what you're talking about because the technical jargon, or it's just too much over my head. And it's just, they're not relating to that ideal client. And it's unnatural to sell, right? And I recently did a podcast about people love to buy, hate to be sold. I'll make sure I link it in the comments because it's a really, really great podcast about selling. But the whole point of this is it's easier for us to put our expert's hat on than to actually be a marketer or to be a salesperson. And I know for me in my industry, especially, I see these people who are so underqualified from an expert perspective, yet they are crushing it with sales because they're really, really good at marketing. And I know for me, that drives me completely bananas. And so I believe that if you have an awareness of when you should be marketing and when you should be being an expert, it becomes easier to kind of oscillate back and forth between which hat you should wear and when. So a marketer, and I'm just going to read the definition, is defined as a person or a company that advertises or promotes something. And an expert is defined as a person who has a comprehensive and authoritative knowledge of a skill or knowledge in a particular area. You can also think of an expert as somebody who has done 10,000 hours, right? If you talk about the 10,000 hour rule, it roughly takes you 10 years to become a well-known expert. And so I bring this up because when you think about what does it mean to be an expert in my marketing versus a marketer, and I would contend that this comes down to understanding how your ideal client speaks about the problem that they believe they have and you have the solution for. Now, oftentimes, or more often than not, there is a disconnect. So I'm going to give you an example of a client of mine, Stephen Green, Make the Grade. He's an amazing, amazing, amazing educator and has been in the education space for many, many years. And one of the things that he helps parents and students do is get organized and create systems and just really create a plan for success. The problem with that is most parents don't believe that that's what their student needs to be successful. Okay. Most people believe that they just need to work harder, or that they don't have a great teacher, or my child should be getting better grades and they can't figure out why, or he or she doesn't do their homework, right? That's the problem that the parent believes that they have. So if Stephen were to market himself by saying, I have a system to help you help your student get organized and help them accomplish more and be more successful in school, they're kind of saying two different things, right? And so part of that is that's him being his expert self, right? Because he knows the solution really is like the underlying problem, and the underlying solution is that the kid doesn't have a system to set them up for success. They haven't created a habit. They haven't established a routine, right? But he can't sell that to a parent because that's not what the parent believes is the problem. And so that's him being an expert, right? As a marketer, Stephen has to speak to the problem that the ideal client believes that they have, because it's going to be way easier for him to get somebody to hit that buy now button if they're on the same page. I've been guilty of this. My clients have been guilty of this. I still kind of slip into this mode from time to time. Heck, I'm being an expert right now. I'm not being a marketer. So it's really, really easy for us to fall into that trap of putting our expert hat on and just either A, helping people come up with a solution, or B, just being like, here's the solution, blah, 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 blah. And we completely lose people as a result because we're not speaking the same language as them. That's like if you were speaking to somebody in French, but they only spoke like German or English or Spanish, right? It just isn't gonna work. And so as you go to market yourself, understanding who your ideal client is and the words that they use and the language that keeps them up at night and what motivates them and what status to them and all of those little intricacies, like what is it that they truly desire? What are their beliefs around themselves and their family and their core values? Like all of that stuff you need to have an understanding of. The better understanding that you can have about your ideal client, the faster you're going to close that gap between when somebody first introduces themselves to your brand and when they become a client. And I've seen the most ridiculously talented people who I've worked with. I mean, sadly enough, I have a past client that I went on their website today. I was going to use them as an example for a training I did for my BEV program. And sadly, they completely revamped their sales page and they've gone back to expert mode instead of being a marketer. And ultimately, that's great, but there's such a steep learning curve when it comes to that you will often lose your ideal client to somebody who's not as qualified as you. So if you are an expert and if you are somebody who's like, why can't I just get these people to convert? You have to ultimately bridge the gap between where that ideal client believes they are based on your research versus the language that you use. So for example, I am doing a big Black Friday promotion. And I am literally in the research mode right now to get real-time feedback around what are people's biggest struggles when it comes to marketing and social media. So I am going to literally use that research as part of my sales page, okay? And I will put it in quotations, or I'll take pieces of it and I'll massage it a little, or I'll take the most popular ones and integrate that into my marketing, because that way I am speaking to that ideal client. And I want them, when I'm speaking to them, to be like, yes, Jamie, like, how did you get into my brain? And that is ultimately one of, if not the most important thing that you can do to get somebody to go from prospect to buyer and really bridge that gap and close that gap. And so I want to leave you guys just with a few ninja tips around how you can understand when is it time to be an expert and when is it time to be a marketer. So as a general rule of thumb, most of your 90 to 95% of your front-facing marketing for social media should be you as a marketer. Your sales pages should be you as a marketer. When you're speaking to a client, especially if they are not a referral and they're not really warmed up, you should be a marketer. You should be a marketer in your nurture sequence. You should be an expert when you are sharing some behind the scenes content, right? When somebody's a subscriber on your email list, your macro content should be you as an expert, but sprinkled in with a marketer. Okay, so those two are kind of a coalescing of the two. When you're doing webinars and masterclasses, that content should be sprinkled in. Your expert self should be sprinkled in on sales calls. And then once somebody purchases from you, you can put that sales hat on 24/7, especially once they've purchased your signature program. If they haven't purchased your signature program, if they've just purchased like, hey, I bought the $47 product, or in my case, somebody would buy a social media snapshot. If they buy that $47 social media snapshot, yes, the snapshot I'm going to deliver and there's going to be no selling. It's going to be all expertise. But I have to leave them wanting more for that next step in the client journey. And there's a lot to talk about in the client journey, but you don't want to just give it all away in that one first product. You want them to move on to that next product and that next product. So when somebody's in your signature program or your high level offer, that's where you can put the expert cap on 24/7 and really get them to move on to that next level. And then the final piece is when you understand your ideal client really, really well, this becomes really, really easy. When you can use the exact language your ideal client uses, it also becomes really, really easy. So one thing to be aware of is that for most of us entrepreneurs, our default mode is expert. And that can be a real challenge. So be mindful of when you're in expert mode and when you slip back into marketer mode or vice versa. The other thing that I highly recommend is to read through all your content through the lens of your ideal client. And then pay attention because it's really easy to slip into expert mode. So you start a sales call, you're in a kind of a marketing role, and then you can accidentally slip into expert mode, especially when ideal clients start asking you questions. It's really easy to be like, and then before you know it, you've given a whole bunch of free advice away. The other thing to keep in mind is just when the eyes gaze over, deer in the headlights look, that's when you know you've gone too far with the expert mode, because you've completely lost them because you're speaking so much techno jargon on them. And then it's okay to be a geek, and it's okay to geek out about what you do, but you have to then bring it back. You have to always bring it back to that marketer to get them to take that next step, to get them to move forward. So I hope you guys enjoy this content, because I think it's really important to understand the difference between when you should have your expert hat on and when you should have your marketer hat on. So if you haven't already, comment below. Let me know if you have any questions. Hit that subscribe button and have a fantastic day. Thanks so much.